I'm Jenny, and I don't really do very much to do with video games. Like, I study things, and I study religion at the moment. My undergrad was philosophy and theology, and I'm going to talk about sort of philosophy to do with games. The reason it's called Broken Binaries is I'm going to talk about sort of the binary morality that you get in a lot of video games, which is why kicking puppies might come up, but it's not approved of, so don't do it. So basically, the reason I tend to use the puppy example is I'm going to kind of keep this to games that are sort of popular, mainstream, that most people will know, because otherwise it gets tricky. But most kind of morality systems in video games literally tend to come down to moral decisions like, here is a puppy. Do you want to pick it up and snuggle it, or do you want to kick it off a bridge? And that's not really how moral choices tend to work in the real world. Like, it's never really a case of, do you want to be the loveliest human being ever, or do you want to murder an animal? Like, so for a start, the extremes are a problem. So I'm going to kind of focus on a couple of key examples to walk through it. One of the most common games that most people tend to know about for sort of moral choices is Mass Effect. And Mass Effect does quite well in that it doesn't go with good and bad, for a start. It's not, you are evil or you are good. It's, you are Paragon or you are Renegade. But everyone knows that Renegade is kind of the morally grey option, and, you know, Paragon is meant to be the boring, lawful, good type. Except it doesn't quite work, because that's not how morals in real life work. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of three key philosophical kind of theories. You don't need to know them in that much detail, but they're useful. So the first and most common one that people tend to know is consequentialism, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a moral theory where what is good is based on the consequences of your actions. So, if you kick a puppy off a bridge, then that is bad because it hurt the puppy, and that's bad because the consequence was bad. The kind of main version of this that most people know is utilitarianism, where you want to increase utility, and the consequences should increase utility. And in the most common version of that, philosophers do like to have their many, many levels. The utility is happiness. So in the puppy example, the good thing to do is to hug the puppy, because that increases your happiness and it increases the puppy's happiness, and yay, happiness is good and the consequences made everyone happy, so it was a moral action. And then there's deontology, which is duty. So it's about the action itself. So, it doesn't matter what the consequence. You could kick the puppy and it could sprout wings and learn to fly, but it would still be a bad action, even though the puppy didn't get hurt, because it's the action itself that matters. It was the act of doing something that's morally wrong. The way what's morally wrong there is decided by various sets of rules. Kant has one which is based, it gets a bit complicated, so I am whizzing through this, where it has to be universalizable, which sounds complicated, but all it means is if I want to do an action, can I wish that everybody in the world would do that action? If I can't, it's probably a bad thing. This is really easy to apply to like the simple cases like, should I kill that person? Well, if everyone in the world killed people, that would be bad. No, that's not moral. But it gets a bit more complicated when you've got things like, well, should I break a promise? And then you kind of want to say, well, if everyone broke promises, promises wouldn't be a thing anymore, because nobody would trust anything, because how can you trust if everyone just breaks a promise? So you don't want that, because by breaking a promise, you break the idea of promise. And basically, morally, no. And then you've got the third one, which is my favorite and the least popular. It's called virtue ethics, and it's based around the idea of like who you as a person are. Like, are you a virtuous person? Do you try to be virtuous? The definitions of what's virtuous vary by theory. In Aristotle's original one, it's all like, oh, be heroic and be awesome. In like later Christian versions, it's like, be humble and kind. So that's a bit difficult. So they're like your three theories. Now, if you take that to video games, it is relevant to video games. You'll find that most video games use consequentialist theories. Almost every video game with a moral system that you can think of probably has the, why is this action good or bad? Well, the consequences of it were. And, that's great, but it's not the only way we can view it. And also, it tends to work on the idea that, so the video games, they might not make it very clear from the beginning, but they all have this underlying set of base assumptions of what consequences are good and what consequences are bad. And this doesn't always work. And this is where I would start to say that sort of this binary morality gets into a bit of a problem. So is it Mass Effect 2 or Mass Effect 3 that I'm thinking of? 2, that's my boyfriend who knows more about Mass Effect than me because I can't play it because it's a shooter, and I hate them. But Mass Effect 2 has a really interesting decision. I'm going to assume, is this going to be a spoiler for anybody in the room? No, good. Basically, there's a certain decision which is called the Geth decision, if you'll talk about it, where you have 2 options. And some Geth have been doing bad things, and they shouldn't have been doing them. And you can either kill all of those Geth, or you can wipe their memories and return them back to like the default resetting, and they can go on with their lives happily as they were before without doing all the bad things. And what's interesting in Mass Effect is that the Paragon choice is considered the option where you wipe their brains and let them go. So that seems like a minor thing, but we can tell from that what the designer's moral background is. They think that murder is the worst thing you can do. They think that that's the morally bad option, that you should never kill people. They're totally fine with completely changing the essence of a person. They don't think that's morally questionable, because that's on the Paragon route. I'm not sure, but how many of you kind of think that, brain wiping somebody is as bad as death? Anyone agree? Yeah, see, it's about half the room. And I'm sure the other half probably think that, actually, no, it's kind of kinder. And that's where the problems come in sort of video game morality, because you're left with this very clear binary of this is what is good and this is what is bad. But it's based solely on what the creators want you to feel. And if it doesn't align with your own moral system, you're going to stop feeling like it fits in the world. I mean, my favorite one for this is Infamous, because that's got ridiculous choices. It rewards you for being evil. You get really cool, Force lightning powers. Tim. Anyway, you get really cool Force lightning powers for being really evil. And, how is that meant to be a commentary on morality? Hey, if you go around and murder all these guys, you get this really cool power. It's not great. I mean, I don't think video games should always make you play as a moral person. That's boring. But if you kind of want to have a moral system and sort of a commentary on ethics, giving people Force lightning for murder is maybe not the way to do it. Also, I'd love to know how, you choosing certain moral decisions gives you powers. It's never explained. You have these powers, and if I go and kill somebody, I get more powers. How do you know that? What I want to propose instead is that instead of this binary, this is good, this is bad. So that's your consequentialist version. I don't like deontology. I'm not going to talk about that because I don't think video games would be good at it, because making people think about an actual action is quite hard. And I also think it's a crap theory. So we're going to talk about virtue ethics because I like that. So I've been playing Dragon Age Inquisition a lot. A lot. I probably should stop playing it, in fact. I think its approval system, it's a really great example of how you can use a different ethical system and still convey ethical choices. So I'm going to vaguely go over a couple of the characters just to make it clear. There's a character called Cassandra, who is pretty badass, pretty independent, kind of tough, doesn't take any crap from anyone. And she's very stubborn, but she's very sure of her choices, but in a very good way. She will make a decision, but if it later turns out that decision was wrong, she will say, I was wrong. I've learned. I will do something different. She has very clear moral lines on what she will and will not do. She doesn't believe in doing certain things, and she's very, very vocal about that. So what's great is, let's say I admire Cassandra. I admire her forthrightness, I admire her willingness to apologize, and I kind of agree with her moral principles. And then I make some decisions in the game, and it pops up on the side, Cassandra disapproves. And that, for me, if I'm trying to play this and make moral choice, I think, I like her morals, I agree with her, and she disapproved of what I did. Does that mean I've done something wrong? And this is a really nice way of using a different system to make somebody think about their ethical choices without saying, what you did was good, well done. Because, it varies. I mean, I might not like Cassandra. I might personally feel like she's a bit too liberal. I might prefer Vivian, who thinks that all mages should be locked away in towers forever. And if she approves of me, then maybe I've done the right thing. And the way virtue ethics, as proposed by Aristotle, tends to work is he suggests that you should find yourself a role model, and that's how you should learn to be virtuous. Because it's a bit tricky to learn to be virtuous, but, he's got this whole idea that by imitating you can eventually naturally come to be that way. And that does tend to be how it works. It's the whole fake it till you make it idea. Like, if you pretend you're confident, eventually you will be confident because you've kind of won it over. Same idea, but with virtue. So the Dragon Age kind of, it's not set up as an ethical system at all, but it's a way more interesting way of developing and making the player engage with moral options than just saying, this thing you did was good, this thing you did was bad, have some points, now you have new dialogue options. It's much more like, this character I admire and respect disagreed with me. I now need to really think about my decision in terms of, am I happy that they disagreed with me? Or do I think maybe, oh crap, I actually kind of made the wrong choice there. Luckily in video games you can reload, which you can't do in real life, but it's not perfect. Now, one game goes even further than this, and this is my favorite game for moral choices, despite having absolutely no system, not even like an approval system to reflect it, and it's Papers, Please. Because Papers, Please does not tell you what you're doing is good or bad or admirable. It says absolutely nothing about your choices. There is no engagement with you as a player about what you've done. There's no moral bar or, a person to say, well done, here you go. There's just you and the people that come into your office and the awareness that your family is starving. And it's entirely up to you to make choices. And yet, this game makes most people agonize in a way I've never seen Mass Effect do. I mean, there's some decisions in Mass Effect that you might sit there for a while going, I don't want them to die, I love them, because that's BioWare. But nobody sits there thinking, if I let this woman in, I'm going to get my pay docked and my kid can't afford his medicine. But if I don't let her in, she's going to die. And I don't know which of those choices is better, because in both of those situations, something is bad. And in those situations, it's very difficult to say, this is good, this is bad. It's more, in this situation, according to my own moral theory, this is the moral way of acting. And sometimes you might have to go against that because, not everyone can be moral all the time. So Papers, Please shows us that video games don't need to follow a binary moral path in order to engage with big moral... In fact, I'd say it shows that giving us this is your good meter, this is your bad meter, is actually the worst way of engaging with being a moral human being. Because who does that in real life? Like, you don't go home and go, right, today I hugged a puppy and I helped a child, but I did punch that old lady in the face. Today was an overall moral day. Nobody does that, and that's not how morality works. Whereas, the sort of Papers, Please, where you agonize and you think, no, I'm happy with that decision. I did the best of my ability. Or even the Dragon Age one, where you're kind of like, yeah, the person that I respect did disapprove of that, but I stand by my principles, and that's okay, because I think I did the right thing, even if they don't. That's way more interesting and exciting. So that's sort of the first half, and I've got another 5 minutes, so I'm going to carry on going, because Jake's on his phone. The other thing, I'm just going to carry on fangirling about Inquisition, mostly because I've been playing a lot, so I can remember a lot of the examples. There's another interesting part of sort of Aristotle's ethical theories, which is whether or not it's more moral to have to try to be moral and succeed, or to naturally be that way. So think of it this way, like, maybe I'm a really grumpy human being who hates people. And yet, when my friend is in hospital, I make the effort to go in and be cheerful and give her flowers and look at, even though I'm hating it, and I hate the nurses and they're all rude and horrible, but I go in and I smile and I try really hard to be lovely. Am I more moral than somebody who that comes easy for, who can breeze in and be friendly because that's just the way they are? Like, which of us has more moral character? Is it me for overcoming my natural inclination to be awful? Or is it her for just being nice? And there's I'm going to avoid giving spoilers too much in this. Basically, if you've met Cole in Dragon Age Inquisition, it won't spoil anything, really. Cole is or suggested to be a spirit. In the Dragon Age universe, spirits kind of don't have free will. They're just kind of an essence of something. So you can have a spirit of hope or a spirit of faith. And Cole is like a helpful spirit. But it's interesting to consider him as a moral agent. Because is he more moral than you because he helps people. That's his whole thing. He loves helping people. And you find all these adorable things that he does that seem a bit weird, but they're helping really. Like, is he more moral than somebody who has to make the choice to be helpful? And I don't have an answer to this, but this is a really interesting question that a lot of games that deal with morality don't look at. There's a whole bunch of options to do with morality. That's just one of them. That video games are so focused on, is this good? Is this bad? They don't look at the stuff like, well, how does somebody be good? Or what does good even look like? So Cole's a really interesting step forward. He's not like a minor character because you can have him in your party, but he's certainly not the protagonist. But he's an interesting character to assess your own role of how morality should work in that universe. Like, how do you find him as a moral agent? Do you find him repulsive because he's not choosing? Or do you admire him and want to be like him? And if you want to be like him, you want to do all the actions that make him approve of you, because that's a good thing. So that's most of what I was going to go on for about that. I mean, there's some really good... I highly recommend Inquisition for some of the more interesting moral choices that you'll get. The actual plot doesn't really have that many big moral choices that really made me go, ah! But the personal quests for each of the party members, some of them do. So I would recommend that if you're interested in kind of seeing how a game can give you difficult moral choices that don't have an obvious kick a puppy, hug a puppy option. They're much more like, you know, hug the puppy and then give it away to another owner who will love it, but you will be sad forever. Or take the puppy home and love it yourself, but can't be able to afford to eat or something. They're a bit more complicated, and I would probably take the puppy home, and then Tim would shout at me for taking a puppy home. I just want a dog. But and Dragon Age doesn't have a dog in it, and it's sad. But anyway, that's kind of my thing about morality in video games. There's a whole bunch more that I could go on about, but I think the basics to take away from this talk is if you're going to try and do complex morality in a video game... no, I remembered my point. Have I got time? I've got time, you said it's fine. Basically, I remembered now. I was going to compare Assassin's Creed and its Templars to Dragon Age and its Templars, because they both have Templars, and it's a handy link. But basically, Assassin's Creed likes to pretend that it's really, really good at morally grey and moral relativity. You know, this whole everything is permitted crap. And the whole idea is that the Assassins and the Templars are meant to both be equally moral, and like, you know, sometimes one's bad, sometimes it's the other. And yet, you always play as an assassin, pretty much. I think there are games, but like, you know, generally it's morally relative, and they're equal. But go and kill the Templars, because they're the bad guys. And that's kind of not how you do moral relativity. Like, if you're morally relative, the Templars need to be as admirable, or as disgusting, as the Assassins. But they don't set it up that way. Whereas in Dragon Age, the Templars are pretty dodgy. Like, they do kind of lock mages up in towers. But it's also implied that often they do that, they do good things, like they protect mages who villagers would kill for being a mage, and they take them away to safety. And the mages sometimes tend to do things like, well, murdering people, which probably isn't a good thing. And then you've got a whole bunch of things. And that's how you do moral relativity in a game. You want both of them to have flaws. You want them both to have extremists. You want them both to have good people. You don't want, well, you know, the Templars, they're the same as us, but we have to kill them because we're better. It's not moral relativity. That's moral relativity that really kind of believes you're right anyway because they're wrong. And that's not how it works. So yeah, that was my final point. If you want to do complex morals, basically, the things you need to avoid are binaries. Because while everyone talks about good and bad as a binary, like Paragon, Renegade, it's a bit more of a spectrum. Sometimes you'll get decisions that, you know, you can't win. Because the world is in a video game, you can't do something perfectly good. Especially if your video games are consequentialist. Because you can't accurately predict consequences. Like, I mean, if you could, that would be amazing. And if you can, come and talk to me and we'll talk. But you can't. And if in a video game, you're absolute good versus absolute bad, that kind of feels like you can accurately predict the future. So first thing is avoid binaries. The second is maybe move away from consequentialism, maybe explore other theories, maybe go and look at deontology if you want. I'm not going to encourage that, but yeah, you can do it. But look into other ways, like having characters kind of voice their opinion on your morals. Don't have them say what you did is a bad thing and then have every other character say, yes, I agree, it was a bad thing. Have different characters with different moral systems saying, oh no, I approve of that decision you made. I think it's really great. You value freedom over, other things. And then somebody else say, well, no, I think what you did was dangerous because you put the notions of the majority over the minority. Have complicated opinions from your other characters so that you yourself as a player are left having to form your own moral system and it's not subscribed by the game. And finally, if you want to do moral relativity, please don't try and play moral relativity and then have bad guys in it. Because anything that has bad guys is an absolutist theory. Because in order for somebody to be the bad guy, you have to say what they are doing is wrong. And if you're a moral relativist, you can't really say that. Because moral relativity at its heart, and if you go to the extreme version, is saying that morals are entirely relative to the person enacting them. So you saying this is wrong proves that you're not a relativist because you think your view is better than theirs. So yeah, if you're going to write morals in games, try and do those three things. Or, do what Infamous did and give people powers for being evil. That could work too. But if you want a sort of a more nuanced game, probably do the first route. Do I have time for questions? Yay, 2 questions.
In the Telltale games and Dragon Age and things, they have that thing that pops up on the screen when you make a decision that says so and so disapproves.
Oh, I didn't mention the Telltale games. Damn it.
Fine, we'll do it together. So yeah, that pops up on the screen and I kind of feel like that's a bit of a, that doesn't happen in real life.
Yeah.
I don't go, oh, I'm going to do this at 3 o'clock and it's like your boss disapproves. I would know then and not the performance review.
Yeah.
So, is it worth taking the risk of removing that and then creating more interesting dialogue where someone turns around and goes, actually what you did the other day was crappy?
So I think it depends on the game. I think I would have liked that in Dragon Age. I would have really liked it if, the next time you took Sandra on a mission, she was really, really pissed off at you. But Telltale does that with The Walking Dead Season 1, and I meant to mention this and I forgot. There's a is it a spoiler for the first? I'll try and keep it a bit spoiler-free. There's a bit where you're on a farm, and there's 2 brothers, and they've done some bad things. And you can choose to kill them, or you can choose to deal with them in another way. If you kill the first brother, all that comes up is Clementine will remember that. It doesn't say Clementine disapproves. It doesn't say, it just says she will remember that. And what's fascinating is in the Walking Dead games, you get a graph at the end that tells you who made what decision. And the percentage of people that kill the first brother is super high. And then Clementine will remember that happens, and it drops. I think when I played it, it was 75% for the first brother, and it dropped to about 15 for the second. And I think that's a really good way of showing that you don't actually need to say whether the character approved or disapproved. You just need to know that the character saw the action, and your mind will go, oh shit, I don't want Clementine to remember that. That's bad, I won't, and you make the next decision based on that. So yeah, I don't think you need the approves and disapproves. I do think you need something to make it clear that the character knows what you've done, but not necessarily their reaction, I guess. Just because, to me, the Clementine will remember that is enough of an acknowledgement to make me go, fuck, she's not going to like that.
You could buy her a dog.
I could buy her a dog, but the dog would turn into a zombie and it would be tragic, so let's not do that. Yes.
From a design perspective, I guess it's interesting that morality systems tend to be systemic rather than emergent. So
yes.
If you look at Papers, Please, although there isn't a clear delineation of what's good or bad, you can say with confidence what happens if you take this set of actions. It always terminates in a particular narrative close.
Yeah.
And I guess that sort of undermines the concept of morality to an extent, because it invalidates the concept of free will that a lot of ethical systems
Only if you believe in free will, of course.
Well, sure. But Lucas Pope's previous game actually is set in the same world, but you're editing a newspaper, and it just endlessly cycles. The rebels take over and you're working for them, and then the government, takes back over and you're working for them. And the idea that you're just trapped in this endless circumstantial consequential loop sort of changes the entire ethical system in a really interesting way.
No, I think games do make it difficult because they're, you know, they are going to be determinist systems, and if you're not a determinist, that does kind of limit how much they can tell you. But I think it's a good stab because, you know, consequentialism is all about guessing what you think is going to happen. So just because the game has a set route, at least on your first playthrough, you don't know that. So maybe it's the kind of thing that games that you play more than once lose their impact as kind of a moral structure. But at least on a first playthrough where you don't know what happens if nobody's spoiled it for you, they do have a genuine advantage to the fact that it is guesswork. But yeah, I think that's a good point. One more. You.
So there's kind of a thing maybe where kind of one of the joys of video games is that they allow us to escape from actually having to make difficult moral choices by clearly labeling.
But yeah, I think the problem with that is, like I said about in the Geth choice though, you're then reliant on you agreeing with the developer's set of morals. Like, for me, the Geth choice, having the good choice be to wipe their minds and leave them alive is horrifying. That is not, to me, I know it's to some people, but to me that's not the moral decision. And having it so clearly labeled as moral, I think can, for some people, break the escapism. Because yeah, it's nice saying, this is the good thing. If you want to be a good person, go and do this thing. You know it's the right thing to do. But if it jars with what you think is moral, that's suddenly, hang on. You know, me being a good person in this game isn't escapism because I'm doing something horrible right now. And
there's actually a really nice thing you could do explicitly with labeling choices as moral, and then the game explicitly leading you down.
Yeah, it'd be nice to try and do a game that had a moral system that was completely at odds with most I mean, you're not going to have all players, but deliberately choosing to make you play as somebody who has a moral system that does not align with the majority of people. Like, that would be really interesting. I feel like Spec Ops doesn't have the moral choice system, but it's an interesting one because the routes you have to take in it, most people are not going to agree with. And and I think doing that kind of thing would have a lot of potential, yeah. I think I want to give Jake the mic back, so thank you. Bye.